everyone. Welcome back to the Growing Together podcast with me, Sunny Vasquez.
And me, Cesar Santos.
A podcast where we talk about everything under the sun related to growth and becoming the best version of yourself. Today, I'm always excited for the episodes that we record. We spend time recording every Saturday and Sunday usually. Sometimes just Saturdays if we're not really feeling like recording 2 episodes. But how are you feeling this morning, Cesar?
Energized. I chugged my coffee, so I'm feeling better than yesterday. I was kind of tired yesterday, but
It's honestly not even morning either now. It's afternoon.
It's afternoon,
like 12,
yeah.
so.
We're kind of recording this in the middle of the day.
But today I wanted to talk about something that I think is super important to talk about, and it kind of relates back to the part we play in our own lives and the outcomes of situations or scenarios. And it makes you start to think, am I the problem? And whenever I think about this, I think about there's a TikTok sound. It's a little bit old now, but it was like, is it me? Am I the drama? I think it is a good question to ask yourself. You know, when you're self-reflecting and looking back on how things turned out or how things panned out, it's important that you look at the part you play in your own life and in the way things eventually come to be, you know. And sometimes we unfortunately play a negative part in our own lives, and we might be the problem. Have you ever experienced that, like thinking to yourself, am I actually the issue here? Or someone has made you start to think that you are the problem, whether or not you were?
Yeah, I know I have in my life plenty of times, so it's definitely something that I think about quite often, especially when there's like a lot of different situations that we go through on our daily lives or weekly lives that like we come across something like, man, like maybe I'm part of the issue here, you know?
Was it that someone like questioned, have you been questioned, like someone made you think that you were the issue?
Like in some of my older jobs that I had where I felt like you're doing the best that you can do to get through the day or get through the week or get through a project, and it makes it sometimes it did make it feel like you weren't doing the best or whatnot, and the results were mediocre, and then they would blame you like, oh well, this is why, because we didn't do X, you didn't do XYZ. It's like, well, maybe I'm not part of the problem here, you know? So
I think there's, again, I feel like a lot of things we talk about, there's 2 sides of the coins, right? There's times that you actually are the problem, and then there's times that you aren't. But sometimes in those times that you aren't, when you go to say like, hey, well, it isn't me, it kind of makes you look even worse, because this person already has like this indicator in mind that you are the issue, that you are what needs fixing. So when you're going to argue at bat that you're not, it kind of makes you seem like you are, to them sometimes even more that you are, because like for them they might see it as like making excuses or whatever.
Yeah, they might see it that you're not working efficiently or something like that, or you're not planning things out correctly. And like, there's so many scenarios that I can even think of that I can talk about in an hour, just about all the scenarios that I've been through in my own life that are specifically about being either whether I was part of the problem or wasn't, you know. At the end of the day, it's like, what do you have control over?
It's hard for us to come to terms with the negative parts that we play in our lives or in other people's lives, but I think it's also hard to trust someone to tell you that you are the problem, because I think there's also a certain bias in people to not blame themselves. So if someone is in charge of you and they're like, well, you're the issue, and you could know in your heart that maybe you're not, but they're seeing it from a different perspective, so they're seeing it as you are, and there's not much you can do to change their mind because they're looking at it with a different set of eyes and also maybe a different kind of bias, you know. So I think that's what makes it difficult, is especially in the world of like work. We talk about both professional and personal growth in here, but I think in the world of like your career and like your work environment, depending where you are, it can be hard to identify whether or not your issues, because there's so many different moving parts, right? And everyone sees things differently, and it takes, I feel like, a really good leader to like kind of root cause things, you know, and to really identify the problem if it is one individual. And I think that we talked about this before in the work environment, which is why company culture is so important. Why company culture is so important is like if you have one person that's just a troublemaker and that, you know, not really great for the environment, it can spread to all the other people. And sometimes it's like a subconscious thing, you know, you don't even realize like the impact one person has on an organization, you know.
I wanted to actually bring something up that you've told me before that kind of like reflects on what we're talking about here, because and onto that point, because I know you've talked to me before about how you were the coin in the Target jar, how you were obviously like a leader in a big store previously, and how you did your best, and yet there were still like things that were being put to blame on you, even though you had little to no control over certain things. Obviously, there's only so much you can control, but
I think that comes down to a different perspective. Like when I reflect back on my time at Target, I do believe there were unrealistic expectations, and I know I'm not the only one that felt that way. I believe that you can't expect someone who doesn't have all the resources to be successful without like absolutely like killing themselves. And I know,
metaphorically speaking.
yeah, metaphorically. Yeah. When I worked there, I worked our night shift, like our closing shift, and we were the least staffed, and we were the busiest during those hours. And so I think it came down to like certain people had different ideas of what could be accomplished with what we had.
Yeah.
And I personally didn't think, like, I'm not a pessimist thinking like this is impossible, but after like a year of doing this, I knew what was possible and what wasn't, and what I could expect out of people. And some people just always want more. So, and I was a yes person. I was someone that was always gonna try and was gonna say yes. So it wasn't me always turning when I got like feedback like, oh, we want to try to do this, or oh, this needs to be better. I would really, really, really try, but it comes down to like, is this even possible? You know? But because other people had the expectation that it is possible, you know, it just, it made it seem like I think to some people it probably seemed like I was the issue, that it was me, that I'm the reason it's not getting done. But I'm like, okay, well, you have other leaders close and tell me that with this staff, and tell me that it's easy, and tell me that the store looks perfect in the morning, because it's not. It was a struggle that we constantly had, and I wasn't the only one that had it. And I think that's what kind of like, especially knowing that I wasn't the only one that had that struggle, it comes down to like, that's how you can identify problems. If you're putting different people in the same position as me, and they can't outperform the results that I'm getting, maybe I'm not the issue. But like I mentioned, there is a scenario where it's like Bob has an issue with Barbara, and Bob has an issue with Karen, and Bob has an issue with Jim. Bob is probably the problem, because it's unlikely that all three of these people are like, you know, that Bob, it's unlikely that Bob has a reason to be like have issues with all these people. So it's not these three people you need to talk to, it's Bob, because he's probably a part of his own issue because of like maybe his mindset or the way it works.
Unless they all colluded against Bob.
Yeah, unless, you know, in the off case that they're all against Bob, right?
Against Bob.
And, you know, there are some environments, I know, like, again, back to Target, there are some environments where everyone picks on one person, or everyone, like, just kind of agrees to not like someone, which is so toxic, especially in an adult work environment. Like, when you're adults, like, that's some stuff that you have at, like, a teenage job with a bunch of teenagers. But I think that was what surprised me when I was starting my career, like, and had like kind of adult jobs, was how petty adults can be, or how like adults don't want to take the blame or fall either, when it's way more noble to just be like, yeah, I screwed up, man.
It can obviously have to do with their reputation. It can have to do with pride, obviously.
Yeah, pride had a lot to do with it, I think.
Yeah, I'd be like, no, like, especially if it's coming from an older adult. Imagine you being in your 20s and you're working with people that are like 34 or 50, and you're telling them what to do, and it's like, to them, it's like, no, like, I'm not gonna take orders from a little girl.
I mean, I got called a teenager on YouTube this week. I posted some shorts and someone was like, "This is why we don't listen to teenagers." I was like, "Sir, I'm 24." But we all have the right to our own opinion. But I think it's really hard. And I can understand why it's hard to recognize where you fall short, and especially in the work environment, no one wants to feel like they did something wrong. I mean, that's for some people, that's their livelihood. I know me, I tie a lot of who I am to the work I do. So when I mess up, it's uncomfortable. It makes me feel bad, but I also want to own it because I know that makes me look better. But some people will just circle around it like, no, this is not my fault. This is not my problem. This doesn't have anything to do with me.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a situation once that I just thought of, where someone didn't want to own up to a part that they played in just the whole case scenario. And I think it was the first time in my life that I realized how people are. Not the first time in my life, but how in a work environment, disrespectful people can be just to not make themselves look bad.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about, and
yeah,
I've known that for a long time. I've worked in different jobs before, but yeah, I've in a similar scenario, I've been put in a place where I'm like, I'm just trying to figure things out here. I'm trying to figure out what this problem is so we can move forward, and it's like this person.
Or there's there's this manager. This used to go around on TikTok. There's this meme of managers why is everyone quitting? And it's like, I wonder why maybe it's you. Maybe it's the management. Because, there's a saying, too, that people don't leave jobs. They leave management.
Yeah.
And I find that so, it's so true because people don't want to have to, make those changes in life either. I think a lot of people would love to, just love where they're currently at and stay there because staying there is comfortable. But when you have bad management, you leave that management, and so often managers don't look inwards and are like, why are all these people leaving? A key sign of if you have such bad employee retention numbers, it's probably the management and the people running that,
Yeah, it could be that. It could also be the fact that maybe they're overworked. I would even probably underpaid. So they find other opportunities. They're like, I can literally be doing X over here and get paid X. So it's like, yeah, see you later. Peace out. But one thing I think that I've learned recently that definitely I can touch on this in regards to, whether someone is a part of the problem or not a part of the problem is the fact that the expectations that were set in the beginning, whether it's, especially if it's professional, if it's in a work environment, if there was a lack of expectations, especially, and you're trying to get people to do a certain task or create something that leads to a certain outcome, it's very easy just to blame them, or blame the people that you set no expectations on to do something, and then they're like, the outcome is like, oh.
And sometimes they're like, oh, you should have read my mind. You should have known that this is what I. I think it goes back to a podcast you were listening to, and I think I heard a clip of this podcast. Is that you can't expect a video editor, when you hire a video editor, you can't expect them to know your vision if you don't tell them. Similar to what I do with content. We have our clients fill out these content guidelines to give to our writers to know what the expectations are, and if those guidelines are very slim and you don't give the writer a lot, you can't expect a lot because you didn't set those clear expectations of what you were wanting out of this article. And I think it's funny because some people think that you should just know that, you should have just known that, and that mindset had me so screwed up in my career. It had made me feel like a failure because I thought, oh, how did I not know that? I'm so stupid because I didn't know that. I should have known. But looking back, I think to myself, how could I have known? Where was this knowledge stored? Who told me this? If no one told you, should you really have known if it's not common sense? But I think especially because I've had to train people recently. I've trained a lot of people. I've realized you have to be so clear with what you want, and what seems like common sense to you may not be common sense to someone else, you know? So if you don't like actually say this, you can't expect someone to know it just because you know it. And I think that's the biggest discrepancy sometimes, is that we feel like some people should have like a general knowledge of certain things. Like, oh, like they should know this, right? Because this is widely known. It's like, it may be widely known, but some people, you know, maybe we live under rocks, or maybe we're just not interested in that kind of stuff, so we don't know.
And also too, there's one thing about you especially as being like the person training other people, knowing something, and then the people that you're training be receptive to them wanting to even learn in the first place. Because there's environments where you could be training somebody, and I imagine you've been in this situation before, where you're trying to train someone, and like the people you're trying to train are just like, yeah, whatever. Like they don't care.
Yeah.
They're not listening because of whatever reason, and it has nothing. You're not part of the problem in this case. It would be they're the ones that are causing the problem because they're not wanting to listen. But obviously, in the environment that you're in now, these people have to learn how to do these tasks because it's part of their job, you know. But there's environments where, like, yeah, you'll do your best, and maybe your execution could have been a little better. I know I'm speaking on my own behalf of trying to train people before, and looking back at it, I'm like, yeah, I could have done a little bit better job there. I could have been more clear here, set guidelines better, and I probably would have done.
But I think it also
job.
goes down to like a foundation, right?
That
like
too, yeah.
Sometimes I think to ourselves, like, you know, we're talking about like, am I the problem? But sometimes you do have to think, was I put in the best position to make the best decisions? And like Justin Bieber has a song where he like says that in the song. But it's like, were you put in the best position to execute what you were supposed to execute? Like, were you thrown in without like a deer in the headlights? Sometimes we are put in situations and just it's sink or swim, you know?
Like I've mentioned like getting thrown in a bull ring.
Yeah, and it's sink or swim, where it's like you swim, but maybe, you know, you weren't the fastest, so it didn't go how someone else thought it would, but in your mind, you're like, oh, I did everything I could. And it comes down to everyone's has different expectations. But again, if you had those expectations set, then you really do have to think to yourself, like, okay, where did I go wrong? I've had to learn, I think when it comes to thinking to myself, am I the problem? I've had to learn how to receive feedback and know that most of the time, if you're working with really great people, the feedback is coming from a good place, and it's coming from a place where they want you to get better. Because, like, let's face it, there are going to be issues in our life where we are the main source of the problem, whether that be in your personal life or in your professional life. Sometimes we genuinely are the problem, whether it's because we're not a good fit for something or because we aren't seeing it in the same lens as someone else.
Yeah.
But I don't think, as much as we're talking about, are we the problem, I think it's also like, I think you said this before, if you're the problem, that also means that you can help be the solution.
Yeah.
You know, if you are the problem, how can you flip it to become that solution, to change how things are going, to change the current course?
To fix things, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, if you are, like you said, if you're, I actually said that earlier, but yeah, if you're part of the problem, you could be the part of the solution. And what do you need to do to do that? Like, what is it? Do you need to consult other people? Do you need to, you know what? Hey, let's sit down. Let's hash this out. What's going on? That's probably honestly one of the best ways I can think of, where you're just have an open and honest discussion with those that are involved in whatever's going on.
I do think that, but I also think too, because people have their own personal biases, like in having those discussions, sometimes you're walking in circles.
Yeah,
you know, everyone's still defending. It's like the episode of The Office where they're trying to think, is this woman hot or not?
Oh.
And it's like no one can. They end up still being equal at this during the argument, because no one wants to defer from like what they already think and like what they already have in their brain. And I think sometimes when you have these situations where you need to recognize the part that you're playing, it's hard to figure out, because you could go to the people that are involved, or you could go to an outside source, but you're also thinking of the situation a certain way. So when you go and you go to that outside source, you might play it in a light where you look better, where you don't look bad. Sometimes we're not even honest with ourselves because it is hard to be honest with ourselves. Like, oh, if I told you the real truth, you might think of me differently. I know that's always been my thing. I've always been so scared to be my full self with people because I'm like, oh, if you knew who I really was, you wouldn't like me, or you would see me as tainted or broken, and I didn't want people around me to know that. And the same goes for when you're in a situation where you think you may be causing this negative outcome. You don't want people to think of you, to deviate what they might think of you. Maybe they have a good opinion of you and you don't want to change that. And so I know when I go to my friends and have a situation, I've definitely been more cognizant of like, how honest am I being when I'm replaying the situation, right? How, let me make sure I shed light on where I fell short, which is so hard to do. But also I tell my friends, please, please, please tell me where I was wrong. Like, tell me if I'm being crazy. Tell me if I was wrong, because I need to know. I need to hear it. As hard as it is to hear, like, hey, you're wrong, I need to hear it sometimes. And I know, like, with you, sometimes I literally sit there and be like, please, please, please just be honest with me. I know you love me, so please tell me, like, am I crazy? Like,
Well, I'm trying to think when the last time was.
every day. It's like every day, Caesar, am I wrong? But I think it also comes down to, like, when I think of this, when I was looking up, am I the problem on Google, it's like 7 signs you're the toxic one, And I think to a certain degree, we're all kind of toxic, whether it be to ourselves or to others.
Yeah.
I think most recently, the toxic behaviors I have are more affecting me than it affects others. But, sometimes we're toxic and it does affect, the relationships we have with people.
Especially if the person who's being toxic doesn't realize they're being toxic because it's something that hasn't either been called out or because no one's actually, maybe no one's ever told them. I don't know.
Maybe even if they were told, they were just like, that person's just rude. Or they're not taking it for what it is. It's someone trying to, I think a lot of times when someone's like identifying like, hey, you might be the problem in your life, when someone else tells you, it feels like an attack. It feels like, this person's so rude. Why would they say that? I think it definitely comes with the intention, like if the person was actually really trying to be nice about it. But sometimes when people do try to give us this feedback, and we might not be receptive to it because we're so far in our own minds, But what would you say is one of your toxic traits?
Oh man, being vague. I know that's toxic, but I can.
No, that's not toxic.
But
like a toxic trait, like there's a trend before that I was like, oh, my toxic trait. I know one of my toxic traits, and this affects me, is how I let like little things bother me, like the tiniest of tiny things. Can get to my head.
That's what it is. Me being a little too on the nose. No, I guess not on the nose. Having a better way with my words.
Yeah, Caesar's super blunt sometimes.
Yeah, being blunt, but
but the thing is, for some people that's not bad. Some people like are super direct. I've had to learn to deal with people that are super direct as someone who is literally like emotional and a baby sometimes. Direct can feel like attacking to me, and I know it's not meant to, so I always have to like go in my mind of like, this person didn't mean it the way that you're thinking they meant it. They're just being direct. That's just who they are as a person, and to not take it to heart. But yeah, you can be direct sometimes. I don't think that's the worst part about you. Like, it's better than being someone who beats around the bush, But it's also like kind of like, I think I'm just someone that's super into saying things that are going to be received by someone in the way that they need to hear it, Mm-hmm. Not everyone can. Like, I could tell you, like, hey, you're screwing this up. And you're going to be like, no. You'll be like, okay, that's going to resonate with you. But if you said the same thing to me, like, hey, Sonny, you're screwing this up, I'm going to be like...
Yeah, you're going to take it in a way that's like...
there's a different way to say it. So I'm always kind of play to your audience, But like, and also, like, just have, like, kindness. The intention is what matters, too. Like, what's your intention behind saying what you're about to say?
And also, too, who it's coming from. So like that's why when I'm talking to you and I want to tell you something, especially like whether it's me, we're talking about this last night, actually. We're talking about the podcast and like us growing stuff out.
Yeah, literally, that's a good example.
This is a perfect example. And my intentions whenever like I have critiques about our topics, or not even the topics, just more on the like trying to grow this thing out on YouTube to get people to go listen to the whole thing on other platforms or just on YouTube, is just like I just calling out like, hey, why don't we do more when we can, not all the time, when we do trending things that are either from YouTube or TikTok that ends up making its way onto other platforms and talking about certain things. So we did a really good job with the quiet quitting podcast, which is the one before this. And I was like, let's try to do more of those. And I think you took it in a way where it was a little bit...
Caesar like said this and I was like, well, like, do you not like the ideas I come up with? Like, I'm the one like doing this. Like, I got really defensive because I'm like, well, why didn't you say this before? Do you not think that I kind of took it as like, do you not think that our other videos can be successful? Or like, you know, I thought he was putting kind of blame on me
for
like not like, I was like, well, I do. Yeah. I was like, I'm the one who thought of that idea. So like, I know when to do a trending topic, but it also like, I'm thinking about how it relates to like our overall conversation of growth and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of definitely took it negatively. And Caesar and I sat there and like argued for like 10 minutes about it. And then I was like, you know what? Okay. I was like, whatever. I'm over it. Yeah, and it all comes down to how Caesar says things sometimes. But I'm also just like, sometimes I'm a baby. Like, sometimes Caesar will be like, I'll tell him, like, oh, I love you. And he'll be like, love you. And I'm like, do you? Do you love me? Like, you didn't sound like it, Caesar. So, I don't know. I'm also just someone that reads way too much into things, which is also my toxic trait. It's like reading way too much into things and realizing, okay, the only person that's causing me to feel this way right now is me. This person, like, a lot of times I'll feel like sad or I'll get upset or I'll get anxious and I'll think it's someone else's fault. But it's really me internalizing all of these things, overthinking, and it's causing me to feel the way I feel right now. So I'm that issue within me, but it's also very hard to identify sometimes when you're in the midst of this like kind of spiral. But I think the other thing is like we can overcome the negative way that we impact people or we impact ourselves, and it comes down to self-awareness and knowing the impact of our actions. Like we had a podcast episode with my sister, you remember?
Yeah.
And me and my sister used to have a really rough relationship. And for the longest time, I blamed it on her. I was like, this person is so hard to deal with. I was like, she has so many issues. And
she's a problem.
I was like, she's the problem. It's clearly not me. I am perfect. Ugh, no. But it was partly, I was part of that issue. And there were things that I needed to change, especially if I wanted to have a relationship with my sister. And, I realized how I might have negatively impacted her growing up or things I did that weren't right. And it's hard to be like, I've been kind of mean or I shouldn't have said that, because we'll justify a lot of things that we do. That's just who we are. I think that we don't want to be wrong. And, we just justify our actions, and sometimes those actions aren't justified. I know when I get in arguments sometimes with you, I'm like, I probably shouldn't have got mad about that, or oh, I probably shouldn't have said that. And like it's hard to come to terms with those things. And I think that's just the hardest part of like knowing, especially because if you're in a mindset where you are toxic to yourself and you're toxic to others, and you're creating these situations in your life, when someone comes and tries to tell you that and tries to help you, it's almost very likely that you're not going to be receptive to that, because you're already in this mindset where you think other people are the problem. So I feel like getting out of that mindset is like crawling out of a freaking well sometimes.
No, I mean, it is. It's because you're deep into, you're super, using the well analogy, you're in there. So like for someone to come and tell you, not from above, like the giraffe, like, hey, they actually got to go down there in the well with you and talk you into coming out of the well, because it's...
But when you're in that mindset, it's like sometimes like, how do I convince this person. And sometimes it's really like when you're involved with other people where they're in that place, you kind of like have to step back and like, they'll realize someday. They will. You just have to believe that they're gonna realize it. You know, there's only so much we can do as people, but it also goes to like, it's much easier to see the problems in other people's lives than to address the ones in ours.
It's easier to have a perspective and just from like people watching or listening to conversations. It's easy just to critique people from afar.
It's easy to be like, they're it's easier to pick apart like what they should do and how they should change things, but it's way harder to actually make those changes in our life and, you know, address our inner demons and our inner problems.
So we have therapists because that's all they do.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all they do.
Those people are usually pretty non-biased, and, you know, they're working to help you. They're working to help you figure out what you need, and I think it all comes back to, again, that self-reflection. But I think everyone is like, when we talk about like self-awareness, I think everyone thinks that it's just knowing who you are. But I think it's so much more. It's really understanding not just who you are, but the things that trigger you, the things that bother you, and predicting how you would react in certain situations, and then changing that, you know, changing how your mind works, which is a mental battle.
Yeah, it's changing your mindset, changing maybe a specific thing that you have in your mind, or a whole. I mean, man, if it's something that you've been dealing, if it's a character trait of yours or trait of yours, especially when it's toxic, it can be difficult to do, and like you can't snap your fingers and change it. You have to like slowly massage it over time.
It's like building up. Sometimes it's just building up to like just being a completely different person. Like we mentioned in another podcast where we're talking about why people hate change, it's often hard to not just identify where we need to make changes, but it's hard to make that initial change, and it's hard to overcome our own toxicity and the role we play in our lives. I mean, our actions have consequences, and we learned that. I feel like we learned that from a young age. You know, I remember when I was a kid, I put my chin on a hot burner because I was just tall enough to reach our stove, and I put my chin on a hot burner, and I obviously burnt myself, and that's how you learn like not to do it again, right? But you learn that your actions have consequences, and I think as an adult, we know that, and we understand that, and we teach kids that, but our actions start to be like these things that have like, as a kid, like it has consequences maybe to you and not to someone else. As an adult, the actions we have like directly impact other people too. And if you don't care about people, maybe you're not thinking about that. But if you do, like, it's hard to realize maybe that you did something that negatively impacted someone's life, you know? If you're talking about work, if you make a mistake, it might cost the company money, you know? And what if that, like, you know, is a trickle effect to like other issues? And, you know, I think when we start to realize the part that we play, we can start to feel like, and maybe spiral like, oh, we are awful people, or I'm just an awful person, and I just, you know, you start to spiral into like, am I worthy? You start to question all these things. Yeah. So it can be, I think that's why we kind of avoid doing it, is like we avoid looking inwards because sometimes we're afraid of what we're going to see.
We're afraid of dealing with it too, you know?
Yeah, because dealing with it is hard work. It's not easy. It's going to be like freaking climbing a mountain or getting out of that well, and the well's all very slippery, and you're just falling back down because you're resorting back to what feels normal. I remember Caesar told me, and this broke me. It didn't break me, but it made me mad, and I know why it made me mad, because he was right. When I worked at Target in Tallahassee, I was also friends with a lot of my coworkers, and you know, the thing you do with coworkers is you talk, and like you sit there and you complain about the job. And Caesar, like, told me one day, he was visiting, he's like, you know, you complain and you talk a lot. And I was like, we're just, like, this is how we have fun. This is how we hang out. Like, those are my friends. We relate to each other because, like, we work at the same place. We deal with the same. And I was so mad. I was like, what? The audacity, Caesar. You have to say that to me right now. And I remember one time he also told me I complained a lot. He was like, you complain a lot, Sonny. And I was like, what?
Forgot about that. Was years ago.
I was mad because I was like, the audacity you have to tell me I complain. Like, are you in my shoes? Like, if you're in my shoes, you complain a lot too. But on the flip side of that, I understand like why Caesar was saying that now, because when you start to complain about a lot of things in your life, you start to realize how never satisfied you're gonna be. But if you start to like kind of flip your complaints into like, okay, well, how can I be grateful for this? Or, let's think of the positive. Like, complaints is a very pessimistic way of thinking. And like, we're all entitled to complain. Again, I still complain. Like, I haven't stopped complaining. But I do try to stop myself when I'm complaining about certain things in my life of like, okay, well, how can I flip this to be a positive? And I remember when Caesar told me that about me complaining a lot, I was like, okay. So I was on a mission to call out Caesar every single time he complained to me.
That's true.
That's how petty I was. I was like, you remember when you told me I complained? You're complaining right now. Why are you complaining, Caesar? I was so petty. And but that's like a defense mechanism too. It's like, oh, you wanna talk complaining, sir? Like, you never do it. And it's true, like, it's again, like, I think Caesar was doing that with the best intention, and at the time I'm always
saying things with the best intention.
Yeah, so. And I couldn't see that at the time. I also was a little bit younger than I am now, so I was in my own head. But yeah, I think we all can overcome. I know the whole part of this podcast is growing and learning and becoming better people, and that doesn't happen overnight, and it's also like a forever thing. Mm-hmm. Like, we're never going to be done growing. Yeah. We're always going to have things that we probably want to change within ourselves or that come up in situations that we have to deal with. So it's something that we'll have to do forever, which is why I think it's important to kind of learn how to deal with these situations. But yeah, I think that's kind of all I have left to say. Do you have any... I want to say any last words, but that makes it sound like you're...
Any last words?
Do you have anything to say?
No. No. I was gonna say I had a second to think. No. I think that for most of us in our lives, we've gone through situations, and so just take the time to realize that you may actually be part of the problem. However, if you are part of the problem, that means you are part of the solution. And also recognize
you can be part of the solution if you're willing to be part of the solution.
If you're willing, also it takes two to tango, right? So, or more than two, or maybe till group effort, right? So
tango.
But yeah, no, you just realize that if you feel like you are part of the problem, take some time to recognize how you can be part of the solution. Also, look towards like you said, look towards outside help. But again, it could be biased, so just take the necessary steps to try to figure things out, because at the end of the day, you can either just live with that, not remorse or regret, but more of just like it's gonna be like a a nail in your back. You're just always gonna try to live with, and there's a better solution than just trying to live with the problem.
Yeah.
So it's better to find a solution.
And I think the reason that we don't want to realize that we're the problem because it's kind of seen as a negative, like, oh, you're an issue, you're a problem.
You're a problematic person.
Yeah, and it's like, no one ever wants to be told that. No one ever wants to be called that. But like Caesar said, you can be part of the solution. And I think a whole part of this podcast is looking inwards and looking at ourselves and, again, becoming the best version of you, and you've got to identify what that means to you. Like, there's not again, one size fits all solution. There's not like a guide to tell you exactly who you should be, and sometimes it is like, sometimes people will say things that may feel like you're the problem and you're not the problem. There's a fine line of whether you are the problem or whether someone's like, outsourcing them being the problem to you.
Yeah.
So I think you just I think you just have to kind of look inwards always and always be kind of reflecting on, whatever situations and understanding the role that you play in them. I think that's the main key here too, is like we all play a role in our own lives and in the outcome of the situations in our lives. And sometimes that role will be positive and sometimes that role would be negative. It's kind of just, that's life. But if we can identify how we've negatively impacted our lives or other people's lives, we can change that. And identification is the first step. And don't get overwhelmed or, anxious about it. Like I feel like we're all works in progress. No one's perfect and no one, I don't think, ever will be. But I feel like it's very admirable to work on yourself and to, date yourself and be in love with yourself and make that commitment to you. I think it's the greatest commitment you can make. And yeah, this has been a great conversation. We're glad that you're here. If you're listening on podcast, please leave a review. And if you're listening on YouTube, please like and subscribe. We're so close to 50 subscribers. Maybe by the time this video posts, we'll be at 50 subscribers. But it's really nice to see people listen to what we have to say. And feel free to leave your comments. I joke about some comments that people make, but honestly, I appreciate them because it helps me kind of, again, look inwards and see how else can I say my message that's going to resonate with more people or in a way that people are going to understand and not seem like, rude or mean, because that's never my intention. My intention is always good. This has been Growing Together with me, Sunny Vasquez.
And me, Cesar Santos.
We'll see you next week.
See you later.